And so once again, welcome everyone. Today is June 27th, 2020, and we're having our fourth Saturday session, which has turned into, during this pandemic, a Zoom session on practices. And so last month, Paul Broadwin gave some wonderful practices, and today I'm going to do one that's been one of my favorites, which is called Inviting Our Difficulties to Tea. And another way of looking at it is called Stepping into Fear. They're both kind of the same sort of thing. As most of you are aware, mindfulness means paying attention to what is happening in the present moment. And it can be a difficult thing to do. Can be a difficult thing to do if you have anything. Dottie, you had a hand up?
Simply to say, if I get, I might have to jump up shortly.
Oh, okay.
For a moment, if I get a delivery, sorry.
No problem. So back to where we were. The idea, of course, is that you shouldn't really have much preference for difficulties or for things that are joys. This is really much more. This is really much harder to do than the simplistic way that I was mentioning it. And the idea, of course, is to take everything fully on, not to turn away from our afflictions, but turn towards them. And it's only natural, actually, when you think about it, to turn away from our afflictions. No one likes to feel bad. The difficult emotions that I'm really going to talk about, although there's a longer list, are the emotions that I consider to be the high energy difficult emotions. This is anger, fear, and anxiety. They're the ones that really churn us up a lot. And we turn towards them and accept them. The idea that our difficult emotions are these things that we must conquer or be real militant against is, I think, a false one in the Plum Village tradition. So what we have frequently is this idea that one of the causes of our suffering is we wish to have things that we cannot have or that we don't have. But the other part of that is that we wish to avoid or to get rid of things that are difficult. And we're talking about emotions, but this also applies to such things as physical pain and other kinds of problems that may show up with aversion. Our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, makes it very clear that we should not turn our minds into a battlefield. That's one of my favorite sayings that he has. That we shouldn't have this part of our mind that maybe is related to equanimity and joy and compassion, all wonderful things, that they should squash down those emotions of anger, fear, and anxiety. In reality, we absolutely embrace them, including all of the negative, even aggressive thoughts that might show up. So sometimes people will come to me and talk about having really aggressive thoughts, like, their boss has been such an annoying person that they can't help having almost this revenge fantasy against their boss. They want to be able to punch their boss in the face. There's absolutely nothing with wanting to punch your boss in the face. There is a great deal wrong with actually doing it, but the idea that aggressive thoughts come up and that they are quote unquote bad thoughts and should be banished, given a little time out in the corner of our mind, is a false one. I think that we accept everything, including those sorts of things, and notice them deeply. So the idea, however, is that you would end up inviting everything in, and the way that you actually become mindful is to observe body and thought sensations that are arising in the present moment. So, although we like to make it a little bit more difficult or a little bit more academic, quite frankly, that's all there is for emotion, is body sensations and thoughts. There's nothing else. So we pay attention to those sorts of things with full acceptance, and including, again, difficult thoughts, or including unpleasant sensations that arise in the body. So Thai has instructed us for a very long time that we should pay attention to all phenomenon, positive, negative, neutral, or what he might call as wholesome and unwholesome and neutral, without discrimination and with our full acceptance. However, we do have a little bit of an egotistical part of our mind, what the people who are using the model that Thich Nhat Hanh would use might call manas. The idea this is a particular form that is there, part of our soar consciousness that's trying to protect us. Some might look at that as ego structure or something along those lines. And the idea of writing a story and bringing up our self-righteousness just occurs. And again, that's all just fine. But the power and energy of these three things, especially when they come on relatively suddenly, is that we get overwhelmed by them. Pema Chodron has a wonderful idea to take a secret pause if you can, but you can't always do that. So what we have found is even people who are good mindfulness practitioners have a difficult time with these three very strong emotions because they are so strong and they are so sudden, and they immediately evoke that part of our mind that is involved with self-protection. So fear is a threat that something bad is going to happen to us. Anger is full of righteousness because our anger is directed at a person or persons, or perhaps not even that, that is looking at challenging our ego, our beliefs. And anxiety is generally hanging around there as a fear of the future. We're usually not anxious about things that have happened in the past. We're always kind of going off into the future, and that's where most of our anxiety is. So much like if you were I like the analogy of a baseball player, and you read everything there was about how to hit a baseball, how to hit those difficult baseballs, like curveballs and very strong fastballs and those sorts of, and you knew everything there was to know about that, but you didn't take any batting practice. When you got into a game, you would be sort of overwhelmed. So I like to think about the idea of inviting your difficulties to tea, or the idea of what we call stepping into fear as being like batting practice for handling these difficult emotions. in day-to-day life. So I'm going to give you a little bit of it. We're going to do a little bit of a guided meditation now, and then we can have open discussion about this. I realize I've kind of rushed through a lot of mindfulness things that I've always done before, although we'll talk about some of them in the guided meditation. But hopefully we can get some learning about this, and maybe have a little discussion about it afterwards. Let's see where it all goes. It's a beautiful summer afternoon in Milwaukee, and perhaps we've all had a lot of Zoom, but we'll see where it goes. So let's begin. So let's just start by becoming centered in our breathing, feeling the breath in your body wherever you feel it. Belly, chest, throat, some combination of those. Just feeling that you are in this very relaxed and safe place. You are here among friends, just being, just sitting, completely at peace and calming. And as much as you can, allow for the physicality of your breathing, the physicality of your meditation to occur. Feeling it in the real physical part of your body. The breath in the belly, the chest, wherever. And now I would like you to bring to your mind something that makes you anxious, fearful, or angry. It may be an episode that you have recently experienced, or something that you experienced a long time ago. It may be a recurring difficulty, such as speaking in front of groups of people, or a particular person who you can't avoid, say, from family or work or school, that always seems to push a button. But imagine yourself in that situation, realizing, of course, that you're sitting comfortably in your home, and you're on your chair or on your cushion, and that you're perfectly safe. But if we can, just elicit what comes up when you imagine yourself in that situation. And notice very much the physical sensation. There's often a tightening in the throat or the chest, a feeling of flip-flops or some sort of activity in your belly. Your arms and legs may feel very energized, like you want to get up and run or fight. Or your arms and legs may be very quiet, as if you want to withdraw or freeze. But whatever is there, you just accept it as closely as you can. Very often, there is a symphony of physical sensations going on. And perhaps you just look at them one by one, or go to the one that seems to be loudest, the one that's most prominent right now. And just, again, paying that bare attention to it without necessarily trying to change it. If it feels a little overwhelming, just remember you're in a safe space. You can back off a little bit if you like, and maybe find a different particular scenario of anxiety, anger, or fear. Notice the thoughts that arise as well. Usually thoughts about protection and self-righteousness. Or sometimes a feeling of unworthiness. I am angry or fearful because I'm not strong enough to face that. And again, as free of judgment as you can be about it, just allow that particular thought to exist, neither adding any energy nor taking any effort to squash it as well. And there's often a lot going on here in the body and the mind, lots of different thoughts, lots of different body sensations. You might travel a little bit from one to the other, trying to get the whole experience, as if you were scanning the horizon, trying to get a feel for what the entire savanna looks like, and being with it. Perhaps even noticing the desire to banish it, but not banishing it. Let it be. you may notice that by the mere observation alone, body sensations and thoughts will change. This is to be expected. At times, the tenseness softens a bit, but sometimes it goes in the other direction. At times, the difficult thoughts, the angry, self-righteous thoughts soften a bit, but they may also go in the opposite direction. But once again, with full acceptance and curiosity, we just allow all of the thoughts and body sensations to be. And now see if you can personify your anger or your fear or your anxiety. See if you can imagine it as a real person, perhaps somebody, arms folded, sternly scowling at you, or perhaps a wounded child, whimpering in fear, afraid to take the next step, or someone, a nervous amount of energy, pacing around, not able to settle down. And it may be a real person that you know. It may be somebody that you manifest that is not anybody that you've ever met. And it may also be you. Maybe you want to meet yourself as the fearful and anxious person. But however it goes, see if you can create that person with your mindful imagination. And however your initial response is to either lash out or run away, let's pretend you're at your kitchen table or one of your favorite bistros or on a park bench. and invite your difficulty to tea. Let us sit here and have a cup of tea together. And you may want to see this person as a wounded child or a threat, but whatever, just breathing there, see if you can feel that particular person's pain and anxiety, and perhaps developing some loving kindness towards your fearful image, some compassion to your angry image, some soothingness to your anxious image. Just allow it to be. And although there is no need, if you wish, you may converse. Hello, my little anger. How are you today? Come and let's talk. Hello, my little anxiety. How nervous you seem. Sit down and let your nerves settle and have a cup of tea with me. Hello, my fear. Come and talk to me about what it is that bothers. And from a space of equanimity, if we can, calmness, if we can. If you can't, that's perfectly well. Allow ourselves to thank our anxiety, fear, or anger for showing up and being there, allowing us to learn this deep lesson. Our difficulties are not assaults upon us. They are great practice opportunities. They are the opportunity to practice, to become happier, more whole, more free by inviting our difficulties to tea, by practicing the great changes that come with each of these events. So as the bell begins to sound, let us take 3 mindful breaths, being in our body once again, accepting and reveling in this wonderful, precious human birth, even when the onslaught of difficulties come forth. So, dear friends, let me come back into the regular space here. The important part of your difficult emotions, besides being able to handle them so that you can negotiate the world a little bit easier, is the idea that they are marvelous practice opportunities. There is we got a little bit of a taste of that in one of this morning's lectures, where there are different realms of existence. And a teacher was talking about how there was this thing called the God realm, which is supposedly the highest realm, and how they don't really get anywhere because they don't suffer enough. And that underneath humans are things like hungry ghosts and things along those lines. And that humans are basically fortunate because we can experience joy, but we can also be mindful enough to deal with these difficulties. And in dealing with these difficulties, we make progress. As Thich Nhat Hanh has written in one book, the whole book's about that, but the title amounts to the whole thing: No Mud, No Lotus, meaning that without travails, the mud, the lotus cannot grow. And the lotus is a wonderful flower that depends on the mud. And we, as wonderful flowers, depend upon our suffering. But it's not just to suffer for the sake of suffering. The idea is to suffer and be mindful about it, to be able to learn deeply some skills towards our liberation. So at this point, I'm open to any sorts of questions or comments that people might have had about the meditation. Was the meditation relatively difficult? Was it easy? Did you find yourself being either excited or embarrassed about some of the things that came up for you? Is this something that you think might be helpful in your day-to-day life? So anything at all, or are there any things that you think that you might want to talk about that might be modifications? Whenever I give a practice, and I'm always a little wary of this, I realize that one size does not fit all. And perhaps people need to modify their practice a little bit when they do these sorts of things. And I'm happy to kind of discuss that as well. So if anybody has questions or comments, if you could bring your hands together in a lotus flower and bow, that would be appreciated. And just so you know, I am recording this, so whatever statements you have, they will go out to the regular Sangha later, unless you don't want that to happen. And if that's the case, I can pause the recording. So. Dottie?
Well, I worked with anxiety that I sometimes feel, and it seemed to me it was mixed with fear. Anxiety because of fearful, they were connected for me. And when we were to personify the emotion, I saw my mom, from whom I get my temperament, you might say. And I think it helped me understand her better, because she was probably anxious and fearful at times too. And I just reacted, as she said, I was allergic to her. But I think the exercise was revealing to me.
Thank you, Dottie. You make a good point, though, and I should probably clarify it. Anger, fear, and anxiety, although all have kind of sort of a hot emotion sort of thing, the boundaries between them is not that separate. So it is very common to have both anger and fear, or anger and anxiety, or all three. And so what they have in common, however, is defense of the self. That's their biggest commonality. It is that this individual self is being attacked. And of course, we have anxiety and fear for real, bona fide survival things. The tiger springs in through the door. You better know what to do about that. You better have your fear mechanism going with that. Some people have even talked about it, and I think this is a little bit of a slippery slope sometimes, that anger is a wonderful kind of impetus for people to take action, including things with social change. So they're not all these kind of negative sorts of things. They are little bells of mindfulness. And in the bells of mindfulness, one of the things that we might wake up as we observe our thoughts is how much our thoughts are based on ourselves, our individual danger, and if we universalize it a little better, we sometimes can achieve some liberation with that. But they aren't exactly, like I say, complete separate silos. They all kind of run together very, very frequently. And Dottie, it sounds like you and your mom can have conversations, even if she's not around. You can still have conversations with her and see how that goes. So, thanks. Diane?
Hi. One thing that really struck me is when at the end you said, what are some of the things that came up, and one of them was embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
And anger was the feeling I was thinking about, and that the whole thing out in public about masks versus people who aren't wearing masks. I have not been so angry about something in a long, long time, and I'm really struggling with trying to understand why that piece of fabric is so challenging to put. I mean, in my head I get it, but in my gut sometimes I just get so uncomfortable and so angry in dealing with that.
Yeah. So, thank you, Diane. I'm guessing, and you tell me if this sounds right or not, is that you want the world to be the world according to Diane. And since the world isn't the world according to Diane and never will be, you're angry about that. You know, that's kind of how we are with that. We want, you know, the world would be fine if everybody just thought the way I thought. Wouldn't everything? This would be a utopia. And that's kind of how that goes with that. Is I think that those kinds of things. So again, it's ego based, but absolutely, without a doubt. Actually, for my own personal practice, and this may happen to other people, is not when I'm actually doing this kind of practice, but other practices, I have embarrassment. Embarrassment is one of the most interesting phenomenons for me, simply because as I was learning how to do all this with all these great teachers, no one ever talked about it. But it is. I'll be sitting on my cushion, nothing in particular going on, and I'll remember something that happened to me in high school that was embarrassing. And I realized it's just ego coming up. That's just ego coming up. Well, you messed up. There you go. Guess what? Even though it was 50 years ago, you could mess up the same way tomorrow. So you kind of need this sort of ego structure, this manas, this thing that under the guise of protecting you is actually enslaving you. And so, you know, it's an interesting phenomenon to go on with that. So yes, you're just basically, your anger is very ego related. I want the world to be the way it is. I want people to wear masks. People aren't wearing masks. Why isn't my world coming true? You know, and you can observe that. You don't even have to have a debate about whether it's right or wrong with wearing masks. You can just notice that you have that particular thing that isn't isn't congruent with the rest of the world. And that's very, you know, that's kind of the way it is. My goodness, on the political spectrum, that's a day-to-day thing, isn't it? Everybody has this idea that their political view is correct. And my goodness, half the population is completely incongruent with it. How can there be so many stupid people? You know, we have this kind of thing going on in our heads all the time. So thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a comment? Dottie?
Well, then, what would be better ways to protect ourselves? If
Ah,
if our ego is, do I understand we're trying to protect our ego?
yeah. So tell me more about what you mean by protect yourself.
What would be more productive ways to not feel threatened or
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first question would always be, am I sure? So we've talked about that, and for people who aren't, there's the four kind of aspects that Thich Nhat Hanh has gone for right thinking. Am I sure? What am I doing? Hello, habit, energy, and bodhicitta. And those are the four things. But suffice it to say, the first thing to ask is, am I sure? Am I really under threat? Am I really under threat? And then the other question is, and sometimes you find, no, the answer is, well, no, not really. I mean, you might be, but you might not be. And or the threat is more to these kinds of things that are ego-based, like, I don't know, your self-esteem and your reputation and all that other kind of thing that we tend to prop up, not very successfully, and just basically spend a lot of time and energy with that. So just examining it deeply and just kind of noticing it. But if your question is, how can you become safer? The answer is, well, you can do the usual things, but for the most part, we can't ever be as safe as we like. And there are two things that we do as human beings that I like to call kind of insatiable needs. Safety and approval. Safety. We want to be as safe as possible, and oftentimes we just can't get there. We just can't get there. It's always something's unsafe. I mean, my goodness, you get in your car to drive to the grocery store, that's unsafe. And especially nowadays, we have the pandemic around, we have way more reasons to feel unsafe, and we just can't get there. And approval, too. We have an insatiable desire for approval, too. It kind of goes a similar way. We want everybody to agree and to affirm us when actually they're really not qualified to affirm us, but we want them to do it anyway. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, most of us spend 24/7 with ourselves, and then if you ask people, how well do you know yourself? Most people with some degree of awareness say, I really don't know myself that well. Well, how can you get affirmation from somebody who knows you 1/100th as well as that? How can you expect that that's going to happen? And yet we seek it. So being aware that kind of stuff goes on, that you can make yourself safe, but also ask your question, what degree of safety would be a reasonable thing for me? And you find out that often it's a bottomless pit. You can't get as safe as you want. So, does that help? Yeah, thanks. Any other comments or questions? I just want to add one thing on that's just really important, is that our fears and our anxieties and anger, actually, even too, tend to have persistent themes. It's not like we're angry at our boss today and then angry at our partner tomorrow and angry at our kids the next day. Usually one person takes over. And the same thing is, most of the time we're anxious about a particular thing or fearful about a particular thing. And it's a strategy by manas that if they hit the thing that you're most fearful from and they keep coming there, you will continue to be dependent on it. So manas, or your discursive mind, is of course very useful for your organic survival. It's the part of your mind that makes you spring away from the tiger. So it's not a completely useless thing. It's just way overactive and has a rather insecure point of view itself. Manas wants to become important enough so that you don't give up on it, which is you must be worried to be safe. You must be worried to survive. And I'm going to help you with that because, I've got all this storehouse of information. I'm going to give you tons of information that's going to make you feel like you need to worry a lot. And it does. It does a very good job of that. But that worrying is seldom useful and is clearly a form of suffering. I should have put worry also in among the as a fourth one to anxiety, fear, and anger. Worry is also in there a lot. So, yeah. Anyone else today? Dottie?
So if I worry, do I talk myself out of it? Or
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a very good question. So the answer is, as we were talking about before, is not to turn your mind into a battlefield, to notice your worry and to have a real dialogue with it as if you were inviting a friend to tea. Here you are. Let's talk about this. And kind of just have an acceptance of it. There's the real part about accepting even what we might call unwholesome thoughts is that we've been taught that the unwholesome thoughts by themselves are bad. The actions are bad. So if you have an unwholesome thought that, like I say, you want to punch your boss in the face, that's an okay thought to have, but to actually do the action is bad. And you can't really get rid of those unwholesome thoughts by turning your mind into a battlefield and squashing it down. You get rid of those unwholesome thoughts by really observing them. And you may get insight, but you may not. You may just be able to notice how your body feels and how this other array of thoughts go along with it. And that's all you really basically need to do. Maybe a better way to do it is, as I say, is to describe it a little better. Describe it a little better to yourself. So, so when you say talking yourself out of it, I would say, I don't think that's exactly what I would want to do. As a matter of fact, I would rather not have you do much talking about this at all. I mean, the whole idea that we like to promote in mindfulness is almost a visceral experience, a body experience, rather than chatting yourself down. So, does that help? Thanks, Paul.
Yes. So, for example, I was raised in the South, and actually in a very progressive family, even by standards elsewhere in the country. But I do notice that I am maybe a lot more complex character than I sometimes wish to admit, including having certain prejudices that come up, which I am sometimes embarrassed about, that still exist and that I still struggle with. And I think, as is often the case, which is part of why I probably am the contrarian that I am. When people say, "Oh, I'm not prejudiced," I'm like, really? Because I, in my experience, all of us are prejudiced if we, if we really seriously look at ourselves.
Right.
And yet I am, I try to look at those things, but at the same time, I'm also very vulnerable and susceptible to wanting to avoid facing up to some of those prejudices.
Yeah.
But I am, you know, and I give myself credit for having been, you know, come to that awareness of you know, very relatively early in life compared to other people, and yet even in this advanced stage of ancientness, I still find myself on occasion shocked by something I said. I said, that's really insensitive, or that's really, you know, that really wasn't a very good way of handling that situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think I'm alone in that. I mean, my perception is that that's probably more common than not. If, you know, I think there are a few people who do seem to me to be relatively amazing that they don't seem to have any of those kinds of things. But I have met a few that people that are like that. But in general, my gut instinct is most of us have a lot of those same things.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. I would agree with you, and I want to remind people of another of the adages that Thich Nhat Hanh, our teacher, talks about, which is, with perception, there is deception. And the absolute surety that people have, I think, is really suspect. They're sure that things are one way or another. And when it comes to things like ingrained prejudices, especially since you are a product of both America, but the American South, that's part of your store consciousness. Of course, those kinds of things would come up. Of course, that's just natural. For you to act on them would be incredibly wrong, but to actually have those thoughts happening is not a problem, except if you actually sort of believe them. That's, you know, the idea that we generate thoughts, that we are generating thoughts, so that they must be true if we are generating them, is one of the biggest causes of suffering. The ability to notice that a thought has come out of my consciousness and is there and presenting itself as truth is a very important way to live, in the fact that you check everything. That's the Thich Nhat Hanh thing. Am I sure? Am I sure? The only answer you can ever give is no. I mean, really, if you're really being honest, you're never sure. And to have that kind of feeling that goes on with that, the parts of your brain, and again, in the Thich Nhat Hanh model, manas, that are generating these things that are coming up. I mean, I would say that most people that have, say, prejudice thoughts, to put it in it, almost all of that's coming from manas. It's coming as protection. You in a particular group need to protect it from this other group because they are this way. It's all ego. And, you know, your ego doesn't have to be individual. It can be collective. You know, we are as likely to root for our teams as we are for ourselves. And if our teams is, you know, being a Democrat or being a landlord or being a doctor or whatever, we tend to root for those teams. And we have to kind of at least be aware that a lot of the things that we do to prop up the belief that those particular teams are worthy are worth us at least taking a step back and saying, am I sure? So thank you for your comment there, Paul. Thanks. Anyone else today?
That was an interesting question or comment you made. I haven't thought about it at all, so I'm just asking it. So my question is, are we generating thoughts?
Mm.
And if so, considering non-self,
Yeah.
who is the we?
Yeah.
the individual or the collective we.
Oh,
And then, so if Paul's thought comes up, I think if I understood you right, you were thinking, okay, that comes from an old seed.
mm-hmm.
For instance, in my family, I was taught, I went to a school that was 3/4 Black when I was a little kid, 1st through 3rd grade.
Mm-hmm.
Those seeds got to me before my parents did. So here were these Black and white people. And I was asked by a group of boys, scared me at the moment for a minute, why don't white people like Black people?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I didn't know they didn't. But then I learned from my parents that
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't play with this little girl because she was Black.
Yeah.
Now, my first seeds were from my experience. So I knew that my mother was wrong. So I was very fortunate that way. You know, but when you're saying, are we generating thoughts? So I think if I understand you right, you say these seeds float up in the form of thoughts.
Yeah.
And then we look at them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next step is that we ask these questions that you asked.
Mm-hmm.
Am I sure what is happening?
Yeah.
Do we ever generate our own thoughts?
Yeah. What a wonderful question, Sue. Just perfect. There's a great Dharma lesson in here. In what we call the historic dimension, we generate thought. And it's usually a we rather than an I, because even as I say we generate thoughts, if you have a thought that comes up, what language is it? It's usually in English.
Mm-hmm.
Well, English is a we thing. It's not an I thing. There's a collective consciousness about what English is. And your collective consciousness relating to playing with other little girls, and some of whom are Black, and not thinking anything of it, and then being told something different, there's a lot of different things. So you are in the midst of doing this, watering your own seeds of equanimity. Wonderful. Then somebody comes along and tells you that's incorrect. Now they have watered the seed of anxiety and fear.
Mm-hmm.
Too bad. And those are the kinds of things that we deal with. The really unfortunate part of human beings is that given the same amount of energy, your equanimity, watering your equanimity, you didn't even know you were doing that, but you were. As a little girl, just playing and not even thinking, you were watering your equanimity. How wonderful. And then somebody waters your seed of fear. Your seeds of fear are stronger on the general level than the seeds of equanimity. And it is much easier to become fearful than to live in equanimity, which is why we have to practice. If we are left to the way that the world just flows, we will be very fearful and suspicious and anxious and angry, and we will tend to see the other person as the cause of this anxiety and fear and anger. And in reality, it is our own seeds that are doing that. And we have to spend more time correcting that by doing the practice than we do by the stuff that just ordinarily happens. So in the day-to-day life, and you see this all the time with people around you, don't you? The seeds of anger and fear and anxiety are watered all the time, and people just kind of just go with that. They don't know what to do with it. We're given the practice, which is look deeply at that. Look at some seeds of joy and water that. You have a wonderful opportunity if you have this memory, to go back to yourself as being a little girl, having a wonderful time playing with these black children. I mean, that's a wonderful seed of equanimity. You can go back there all the time and have that sort of thing. I have the wonderful seed of equanimity, and as I grew up, my main recreation was playing basketball. And of course, people don't know you just play pickup basketball when you play with anybody. I had the wonderful opportunity of playing with a lot of black basketball players, and it was just great. I mean, it's a society all of its own, and you have all of those kinds of things that go on with that. So we can water that experience, but I will bet you, and I'm just guessing, if left to your own devices, you will remember your parents' admonition, then you will remember the joy of playing with those kids. It just happens. That's just the way we are. We're wired to kind of go to the negative. Or as Rick Hansen, that wonderful, wonderful author, likes to say, we are Velcro that sticks for negative events. And we are Teflon for positive ones. That positive event of you playing with those little girls slides away very easily. And yet, the admonition that you have, maybe you shouldn't play with that person, without really telling you why, which makes it even more mysterious, right? Why is that? Yeah, it's even more mysterious. My goodness, what did they do, especially when you're a little kid? Do they have magic spells? Will they turn me into a frog? Things like that. That's much stickier. That's much stickier. You have Velcro for that. So we need to practice all that more, because that's the way we were put together as human beings. So thank you, Sue. I'm sorry, I forgot to add the other thing. Yes, but in the ultimate dimension, thoughts, even the thoughts that arise in your organic brain, they're just basically part of a universe and not really related to any particular self. But in the historical dimension, the one where you actually have to pay your taxes, and the only place where you can really get a latte, in that realm, yes, your thoughts are being generated by your own store consciousness and the collective store consciousness. Yeah. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Are there any other further? Dottie, yes.
Thank you. I've mentioned this before. Since I was a professional musician, I almost always have music running through my head. And I've been debating this for years, I guess, since coming to mindfulness. What do I do with that? Today I tried something different. I thought, well, maybe I'll be mindful of the music. Maybe I'll put my attention to what's going on in my head. And it was great. I appreciated the music I was hearing as if I were in a concert hall, rather than having it just go on like music in the background, like static. I think I started to appreciate it because I was listening to it. And then I found my attention went to what I was doing, which was refreshing too. It's a whole different sort of experience when you're mindful and paying attention.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I'm assuming the music was pleasant music. Yeah, so you just experience the joy. Just let it be. That's all. If you like, and this is entirely up to you, you might figure out where in your body that joy is being felt. That'll reinforce it. So, but just have the joy. See, one of the things that happens to people all the time is joyful events. Joyful events happen all the time. You're just sitting there, music coming through. How wonderful. You know, you're just sitting around and all of a sudden you have this wonderful thought about something that happened when you were a kid. Or you look outside and you see a beautiful bird flying. These things happen all the time. We tend to push them into the background. And the recommendation, and the person who once again who talks about this a lot is Rick Hansen, is you pay attention to what's going on in your body at the time. You're much more able to lock it in as a positive thought that you can get to whenever you need to get to it. But yeah, the thing that I would resist a little bit, but just a little bit, because I'm trying to also not turn your mind into a battlefield, is if you have your analytical mind kind of following close behind the music, maybe you ought to let that rest. Well, why am I thinking about this music right now? And why this particular music? Why not that particular music? And then that's a very short road to, oh my gosh, maybe I'm supposed to learn this kind of music because I'm doing this kind of recital thing later and I haven't practiced. I mean, you can see where that all kind of goes. So just being able to be with it is all you really need to do, and setting aside as much as you can your analytic mind. So thank you. Yes, Pamela?
I'm absolutely jealous of Dottie that she can have music running through her brain and just listening to it at any time. It's probably beautiful too, stuff that she's played and heard. I would love that.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd share that.
And I don't know if this is true or not for other people. So Dottie's been playing music her entire life. I started playing music about 15 years ago. I picked up a guitar. And I will tell you that that's one of the things that's really kind of surprised me, is that just picking up a musical instrument like that, I'll have music playing through it. So, and it will sound like the music that I am playing, not the music that, so if I got some music that I knew some musical group did, once I played it, half a dozen times or so, it sounds like my playing rather than the regular thing. And yeah, I've been surprised at what a source of joy that could be. So, yes, Paul.
Yeah, if it weren't for having that ability to, as I say, change the channel, I think I would quickly go insane. I was raised on classical music to the extent of an awful lot of classical music I'm so bored with that I can't listen to it very often because it's almost too familiar to me, some of it. So I'm kind of, if I'm going to search for classical music, I look for chamber music pretty much. The symphonies have become kind of like listening to top 40 hits to me sometimes, but they're useful at times to be able to bring them up with that familiarity though too, because I suffer hugely from earworms, and so being able to change the channel, and also even with my tinnitus, sometimes I can, if my tinnitus is driving me crazy, okay, start imagining a song in my head, and that can sort of override the attention that the sounds in the background are giving me, which I have persistently. So it is a very useful tool, but I think most of us can learn to do that. Just to learn by memory something we really enjoy enough, and then be able to say, oh, okay, well, how about if I listen to this? So it's worth doing.
Thank you, Paul. There is also, I should probably mention when we're talking about negative emotions, there's a term that comes from the Buddhist time called changing the peg. Let's say you do have, and you keep working with it, a persistent negative thought about, I don't know, your sister-in-law or something, and you're really having a hard time with that, the way that, and this is true even among modern carpenters, but back then, what you would do with a rotten peg for your thing is that you would not necessarily remove the peg, but get a new peg and pound it in. It's called changing the peg. So you might say, instead of trying to get rid of the negative thoughts about your sister-in-law, find something that they can do, something that they can do. So, for example, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, Democrat for my entire life. Whenever I think about all of the kinds of things that Donald Trump does to drive me crazy, I remember that his brother died of alcoholism. A big deal in their family. And Donald Trump refuses to drink. He refuses to drink. He has at least, he has that one thing. That's really an important thing to do. Or as an example for other people who have alcoholics in their families and everything else. So, I have that one thing that kind of helps. That's my peg to drive through for Donald Trump sometimes. So maybe a small thing, but it's still something. So, So anyone else have a comment or question? Wonderful, wonderful discussion today. Well, thank you all for your kind attention then. We'll have a sound of the bell and see you in the near future sometime, most likely. Be well, everyone.
Thank you so much.
See you all.
Bye-bye.
Right.